A chilling advertisement in the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette announces a murder at Willow Cottage, drawing the quiet village of St. Mary Mead into a web of deception. Who placed the cryptic notice, and why? When a stranger bursts in with a desperate warning, only to vanish in a flash of gunfire, Miss Jane Marple's keen mind begins to unravel a tangle of secrets. A stolen sapphire brooch, a hidden room, threatening letters, and a doctor with a shadowed past. As the clock ticks, can Miss Marple expose the truth before the real danger strikes? Dive into a mystery where every clue hides a deeper lie, and trust is the rarest jewel of all. Chapter 1. The curious advertisement. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, curling around the ivor-clad cottages like a gossamer shawl. The village, nestled in a gentle fold of the English countryside, was stirring to life. Sparrows chattered in the hedgerows, and the faint clatter of milk bottles echoed from doorsteps. At Lilac Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, a skein of soft grey wool unspooling in her lap. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by age, flickered between the half-finished scarf and the world beyond her laced curtains. It was a Thursday, unremarkable by all accounts, until the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette arrived. The paper-boy, young Tommy Pierce, flung it onto the doorstep with his usual careless aim, and Miss Marple's housemaid, Florence, retrieved it with a tut of disapproval. The newspaper, still crisp with the scent of ink, lay on the breakfast table beside a pot of Darjeeling and a single boiled egg. Miss Marple, ever methodical, unfolded it with care, her fingers smoothing the creases as she scanned the headlines. Her gaze halted on page 3, where a small, neatly bordered advertisement caught her attention. It was an oddity, tucked between a notice for a lost tabby cat and an appeal for volunteers at the church fete. The words were stark, almost theatrical, printed in bold type. A murder is announced at Willow Cottage. Friday, 7 p.m. Friends invited. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. She leaned closer, her lips pursing as she reread the lines. A murder announced. The phrasing was as peculiar as it was provocative, like a riddle wrapped in a dare. In St. Mary Mead, where the most scandalous event of late had been Mrs. Tuttle's overcooked scones at the Women's Institute, such a declaration was nothing short of extraordinary. She set the newspaper down and sipped her tea, her mind already turning over possibilities. Was it a jest? Perhaps a misguided attempt at humour by some village youth, or a theatrical stunt, a ploy to draw a crowd for a charade. Yet the word murder carried a weight that prickled her instincts. Miss Marple had seen too much of human nature to dismiss it lightly. Beneath the village's idyllic surface, she knew currents of envy, greed, and secrets often swirled. Rising from her chair, she tucked the newspaper under her arm and donned her best hattar, modest affair with a single velvet rose. If answers were to be found, the post office was the place to start. Mrs. Pippin, the postmistress, had a memory for details as sharp as her tongue was loose. The walk to the post office was a pleasant one, though the mist had yet to lift, lending the high street an air of mystery. The butcher's shop was already bustling, with Mr. Carver wielding his cleaver like a conductor's baton. Across the way, the bakery exhaled the warm scent of fresh bread, and Miss Marple nodded to Mrs. Tuttle, who was sweeping the pavement with more vigour than necessary. "Morning, Miss Marple," called Mrs. Tuttle, pausing to lean on her broom. "Did you see that queer notice in the Gazette? A murder, it says. At Willow Cottage, no less. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling with that deceptive mildness that so often disarmed the unwary, most curious. Mrs. Tuttle, I dare say it's a puzzle worth pondering. Have you heard any talk about it? Mrs. Tuttle's cheeks flushed with the thrill of gossip. Oh, plenty. They're saying it's Mrs. Grayson's doing. She's always been a bit odd, hasn't she, living alone in that big house, but young. Clara Beaumont reckons it's a prank. She was in the shop yesterday, buying sugar, and said she wouldn't miss it for the world. Clara Beaumont. Miss Marple's tone was light, but her mind filed the name away. The young heiress, newly arrived in St. Mary Mead, had caused a stir with her fashionable dresses and guarded manner. And what does she make of it? Says, it's likely some fool with too much time on their hands, Mrs. Tuttle replied, lowering her voice. But between you and me, Miss Marple, I wouldn't put it past that Dr. Harrow. He's got a sly look about him, always poking about where he's not wanted. Miss Marple thanked her and continued on, her thoughts now weaving a tapestry of possibilities. Willow Cottage, home to Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, was a handsome Georgian house on the edge of the village, its windows often shuttered, its garden overgrown. Mrs. Grayson, a widow of some years, was rarely seen except at church, her face half hidden by a mourning veil. Dr. Philip Harrow, the village's new physician, was another enigma man of charm and polish, yet with a shadow in his past that no one could quite pin down. At the post office, Mrs. Pippin was sorting letters behind the counter, her spectacles perched precariously on her nose. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple entered, and the postmistress looked up with a smile that was half curiosity, half suspicion. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, pushing a stack of envelopes aside. "I suppose you're here. About that advertisement. The whole village is talking about it." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, placing the Gazette on the counter and tapping the offending notice. "I was wondering if you might know who placed it. An unusual request, to say the least." Mrs. Pippin's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of being in the know. "I thought you'd ask. It came in yesterday morning, slipped under the door, in an envelope with no name, no address, just a typed note and a postal order for the fee. I thought it peculiar, but Mr. Jenkins at the Gazette said it was paid for, so they printed it." "Typed, you say?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, but her mind was racing. A typewriter suggested deliberation, perhaps an attempt to conceal identity, and no one saw who delivered it. "Not a soul," Mrs. Pippin said, shaking her head, though Tommy Pierce said he saw a stranger near the post-box late last night, man in a dark coat. He said, but it was too foggy to see much. Miss Marple thanked her and stepped back into the street, her thoughts as tangled as the wool in her knitting bag. A typed note, an anonymous stranger, and an announcement of Whodunit was a puzzle that demanded unravelling. She resolved to visit Willow Cottage tomorrow evening, not as a mere spectator, but as an observer of human nature, where the true clues often lay. That afternoon, the village was alive with speculation. At the tea shop, Miss Marple sipped a cup of Earl Grey and listened to the chatter. The vicar, Mr. Clement, was convinced it was a theatrical stunt, perhaps a rehearsal for a play. His wife, Griselda, younger and more fanciful, suggested it might be a treasure hunt gone awry. But Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a conversation at the next table, where Clara Beaumont sat with a young man in a tweed jacket. Clara's voice was low, but Miss Marple's hearing was as sharp as ever. "It's absurd, Peter," Clara was saying, her fingers twisting a napkin. "Who announces a murder? It's got to be a joke, but I'm going anyway." I want to see Mrs. Grayson's face when it all falls apart. Peter, whom Miss Marple recognized as Peter Langley, the local solicitor's son, leaned forward. Be careful, Clara. Willow Cottage has secrets. My father handled old Mr. Grayson's will, and there were irregularities, things that never quite added up. Miss Marple's needles, which she had resumed knitting to avoid suspicion, clicked a little faster. Irregularities in a will that was a thread worth pulling. She made a mental note to speak with Mr. Langley Sr., though discreetly. Solicitors, she knew, could be as tight-lipped as clams as evening fell. Miss Marple returned to Lilac Cottage, her mind buzzing. She sat by the fire, the Gazette open on her lap, and considered the advertisement once more. It was bold, almost taunting, as if daring someone to act. But who was the intended audience? The villagers, drawn by curiosity, or someone specific, lured into a trap? The word friends in the notice intrigued her. It suggested familiarity, perhaps a personal vendetta cloaked in public spectacle. She recalled a similar incident in her youth, when a neighbor had received anonymous letters hinting at a scandal. The culprit had been a jilted lover, using the letters to unsettle their rival. But this felt different, grander, more theatrical. Miss Marple's instincts told her that the advertisement was a catalyst, designed to provoke a reaction, and reactions, she knew, often revealed more than words. The next morning, Friday, dawned crisp and clear, the mist finally lifting to reveal a sky of pale blue. Miss Marple dressed with care, choosing a tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan that lent her an air of harmless respectability. She packed a small notebook and pencil in her handbag alongside her knitting, and set out for the village hall where the Women's Institute was meeting. It was the perfect place to gauge the villagers' mood before the evening's event. The hall was a hive of activity, with trestle tables laden with homemade jams and knitted tea cozies. Mrs. Tuttle, presiding over the refreshment table, beckoned Miss Marple over with a conspiratorial air. "It's all anyone can talk about," she whispered, pouring tea into a chipped china cup. "They're saying Mrs. Grayson's gone and locked herself in Willow Cottage, refusing to answer the door. And Dr. Harrow was seen there this morning, carrying his medical bag. Do you think she's taken ill with the nerves?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene. "Perhaps she's simply preparing for her guests," she suggested, though her mind was elsewhere. Dr. Harrow's presence at Willow Cottage was intriguing. Was he attending to Mrs. Grayson's health, or pursuing some other purpose? As the meeting progressed, Miss Marple observed the villagers' faces. There was excitement, yes, but also unease. The advertisement had stirred something in St. Mary Mead, like a stone dropped into a still pond. She caught snippets of conversation, theories about a prankster, whispers of Mrs. Grayson's past, and speculation about Clara Beaumont's sudden interest in the cottage. By late afternoon, Miss Marple returned home to prepare for the evening. She chose a simple black dress, its severity softened by a cameo brooch, and packed her handbag with care. The notebook and pencil were joined by a small torch, just in case. As she locked her door and stepped into the gathering dusk, she felt a familiar thrill, the sense that a mystery was unfolding, and she was uniquely positioned to unravel it. The high street was quiet as she made her way to Willow Cottage, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke. Other villagers were heading the same way, their voices hushed but eager. Miss Marple noted familiar faces, Mr. and Mrs. Clement, Clara Beaumont in a stylish green coat, and Dr. Harrow, his expression unreadable, Mrs. Tuttle trailed behind, clutching a basket as if expecting a picnic rather than a murder. Willow Cottage loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly behind drawn curtains. The garden gate creaked as Miss Marple pushed it open, her eyes scanning the shadowed lawn. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the clock to strike 7. She joined the small crowd at the door, where Mrs. Grayson herself appeared, her face pale but composed. "Welcome," Mrs. Grayson said, her voice steady but strained. "I don't know who placed that dreadful advertisement, but since you're here, please come in." The group filed into the drawing room, a handsome space with faded wallpaper and a crackling fire. Miss Marple took a seat near the back, her knitting in her lap, her eyes missing nothing. The clock on the mantel ticked towards 7, and the room grew quiet, the weight of expectation pressing down. Miss Marple's fingers moved automatically, her needles a soothing rhythm as she watched the faces around her. Clara's hands were restless, twisting a handkerchief. Dr. Harrow stood by the window, his gaze darting to the door. Mrs. Tuttle whispered to her neighbour, her eyes wide with anticipation, and Mrs. Grayson, seated by the fire, seemed to shrink into her chair as if bracing for a storm. As the clock struck 7, a hush fell. Every eye was on the door, every ear straining for a sound. Miss Marple's heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from the certainty that something was about to happen. And in that moment, she resolved to be ready not just to witness, but to understand. The chapter closed with Miss Marple's quiet determination, a satisfying pause that left the mystery open yet poised for the next revelation. She knew the advertisement was no mere prank. It was a thread in a larger tapestry, and she would follow it to its source. Chapter 2. The Gathering at Willow Cottage. The drawing room of Willow Cottage was a study in contrasts, elegant in its bones, with high ceilings and a carved mahogany mantel, yet worn by time, its velvet curtains faded and the Persian rug threadbare. At the edges, the fire in the grate cast flickering shadows, lending the room an air of expectancy that matched the tension in the air. Miss Jane Marple sat near the back, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes as keen as a hawk's despite the dim light. The clock on the mantel had just struck 7, and the assembled villagers, some curious, some apprehensive, waited for the promised murder to unfold. Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, the widowed mistress of Willow Cottage, stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly. Her black silk dress, though impeccably tailored, seemed to weigh on her slight frame, and her eyes darted nervously to the door. Around her, the guests formed a loose semicircle. Clara Beaumont, the young heiress, perched on a chintz sofa, her green coat folded neatly beside her. Dr. Philip Harrow, leaning against a bookcase, his face a mask of studied calm. Mrs. Tuttle, the shopkeeper, clutching a lace handkerchief as if it were a talisman. And the vicar, Mr. Clement, beside his wife Griselda, who stifled a yawn behind her hand. A handful of others, village stalwarts, like the baker, Mr. Finch, and the postman, Mr. Dobbs, filled the room, their whispers buzzing like bees. Miss Marple's gaze swept the gathering, noting the subtle tells of each person. Clara's fingers, restless on her lap, betrayed a tension at odds with her poised exterior. Dr. Harrow's left hand, tucked in his pocket, flexed rhythmically, as if gripping something unseen. Mrs. Tuttle's eyes flitted from face to face, hungry for drama. And Mrs. Grayson looked like a woman awaiting a verdict, her lips pressed into a thin line. The advertisement in the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette had promised a murder at 7 p.m, and the moment had arrived. Yet the room remained still, save for the crackle of the fire and the faint creak of floorboards overhead. Miss Marple's needles paused as she tilted her head, listening. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, like the pause before a storm. Perhaps it was a prank, after all. Griselda ventured, her voice bright but uncertain. Some silly game to stir us up. Mr. Clement frowned, adjusting his spectacles. A poor taste in games, if you ask me. Who would jest about such a thing? Before anyone could answer, a sharp gust rattled the windows, and the lights flickered. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The flicker was brief, but it felt deliberate, like a stage cue. Then, without warning, the door to the drawing-room burst open, and a man stumbled in. His silhouette framed against the dark hallway. He was a stranger, tall and gaunt, his face half hidden by a scarf and a low-brimmed hat. His coat, damp from the evening mist, glistened in the firelight. In his right hand he clutched a crumpled piece of paper, and his left pressed against his chest as if in pain. The room froze, every eye on him. "Stop this," he rasped, his voice raw and urgent. "It's not what you think someone's been." His words cut off as a loud crack echoed through the room, sharp as a whip. The lights went out, plunging the space into darkness. Screams erupted Mrs. Tuttle's high-pitched wail, Griselda's startled yelp, and a low curse from Mr. Finch. Miss Marple gripped her knitting, her senses heightened. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder, and her ears caught the thud of a body hitting the floor. She remained still, her mind racing to catalogue the sounds. A scuffle near the door, the rustle of fabric, and then silence. When the lights flickered back on, the stranger was gone. The door stood ajar, swaying slightly, as if mocking their confusion. A faint smudge of mud marked the threshold, but no other trace of the man remained. The guests stared at one another, faces pale, voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock. "Where is he?" Mrs. Tuttle cried, clutching Mr. Dobbs's arm. "He was shot, wasn't he? I heard it." "Nonsense," Dr. Harrow said, his voice calm but edged with strain. He stepped toward the door, peering into the hole. "There's no blood, no body. It must have been a blanker theatrical stunt." Clara stood, her eyes blazing. "A stunt?" He looked terrified. "And that note did. You see it? He was trying to warn us." Mrs. Grayson sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Who was he? Why my house?" Miss Marple, unnoticed in her corner, slipped her knitting into her bag and rose quietly. While the others argued, she knelt by the door, her fingers brushing the floor. There, half hidden beneath a side table, was a torn scrap of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. She tucked it into her sleeve, her movements swift and discreet, and rejoined the group. "Let's not panic," Mr. Clement said, raising his hands for calm. "We should search the house. He may be injured or hiding." Dr. Harrow nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll check the garden. He might have fled outside." He strode out, his footsteps echoing in the hall. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind turning over the scene. The stranger's entrance had been dramatic, almost rehearsed, yet his fear had seemed genuine. The gunshot, or whatever it was, had been perfectly timed with the light's failure, and that note, clutched so tightly, suggested a message meant to be delivered. She glanced at Clara, who was pacing, her face a mix of anger and unease. "Miss Beaumont," Miss Marple said softly, approaching her. "You mentioned the note. Did you see what was on it?" Clara blinked, startled by the older woman's gentle tone. No, not clearly. It looked handwritten, though scrawled, like he'd written it in a hurry. Why? Miss Marple smiled, her expression benign. Just curious, my dear. These things often have a way of explaining themselves. The search of Willow Cottage yielded nothing, Dr. Harrow returned, reporting no sign of the stranger in the garden or the lane beyond. The other guests, led by Mr. Clement, checked the parlour, the kitchen, and the upstairs rooms, but found only dust and locked doors. The mud on the threshold was the only clue, and even that was inconclusive. Smeared by too many feet, Mrs. Grayson, regaining some composure, offered tea to soothe rattled nerves. The group reconvened in the drawing-room, their earlier excitement replaced by unease. Miss Marple accepted a cup, her eyes never straying far from the faces around her. She noted how Dr. Harrow avoided Clara's gaze, how Mrs. Tuttle whispered furiously to Mr. Finch, and how Mrs. Grayson's hands shook as she poured. "I think we should call the constable," Griselda suggested, her voice more serious now. "This feels wrong. Dr. Harrow's tone was sharp. "It's a prank gone too far, nothing more. Calling the police will only make us look foolish." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind elsewhere. The scrap of paper in her sleeve felt like a tiny ember, burning with potential. She would examine it later, in the privacy of Lilac Cottage, but already she suspected it held a key to the stranger's purpose. The gunshot, the darkness, the stranger's disappearance, it was all too neatly staged. Yet the fear in his voice had been real. Someone had orchestrated this, but to what end? As the group debated, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Willow Cottage itself. The house, with its shuttered windows and overgrown garden, held secrets. She was sure. Mrs. Grayson's nervous demeanour suggested she knew more than she let on, and Clara's agitation hinted at a personal stake. Dr. Harrow, too, was a puzzle. His quick dismissal of the incident felt calculated, as if he were steering the narrative. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "we should consider why the advertisement specified friends. It implies a connection to someone here, don't you think?" The room fell quiet. Mrs. Grayson's teacup rattled against its saucer. Clara's eyes flicked to the floor, and Dr. Harrow's hand stilled in his pocket. Miss Marple's words, gentle as they were, had landed like a stone in a pond, sending ripples through the group. "I'm sure it's just a figure of speech," Mrs. Tuttle said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Anyone could place an ad, couldn't they?" "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. "But it's curious, isn't it, how specific it was? Willow Cottage, this very hour, this very room. Almost as if someone wanted us all here, together." The conversation shifted, the guests deflecting with nervous laughter or quick changes of subject. Miss Marple said little more, content to listen as the group dispersed, some lingering to gossip, others hurrying home. She declined Mrs. Grayson's offer to stay longer, citing the late hour, and stepped into the night, her torch casting a thin beam on the path. The village was quiet, the stars sharp overhead. As she walked, Miss Marple's fingers brushed the scrap of paper in her sleeve. She would examine it under better light, but already she felt the shape of the mystery taking form. The stranger's appearance, the gunshot, the note, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, one she was determined to solve. The advertisement had been a lure, but for whom and why? Back at Lilac Cottage, she lit a lamp and unfolded the scrap. It was torn, the ink smudged, but a few words were legible. "Beware the shadow. Trust no one." The handwriting was hurried, uneven, as if written under duress. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A warning, perhaps, or a plea. But from whom and to whom? She set the paper aside, her mind alight with possibilities. The stranger had vanished, but his presence lingered, a thread she would follow. Tomorrow she would visit the vicar, whose knowledge of village history might shed light on Willow Cottage's past. For now she felt a quiet satisfaction. The evening had not ended in murder, but it had begun a mystery, and Miss Marple was in her element. The chapter closed with the group shaken but unharmed, and Miss Marple resolute, her discovery of the note a small triumph that promised deeper truths to come. Chapter 3. Whispers of the past. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Lilac Cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming beside a plate of buttered toast. The scrap of paper from Willow Cottage lay before her, its cryptic words, "Beware the shadow. Trust no one," etched in her mind. The ink was faded, the tear jagged, but the urgency of the message was unmistakable. She sipped her tea, her thoughts weaving through the events of the previous evening, the stranger's dramatic entrance, the gunshot that wasn't, and the uneasy faces of the guests. The mystery of the newspaper advertisement was deepening, and Miss Marple sensed that the answers lay not just in the present, but in the shadowed corners of St. Mary Mead's past. She folded the scrap carefully and tucked it into her handbag, alongside her knitting and a small notebook. Today she would seek out the vicar, Mr. Clement, whose memory for village lore was as reliable as the church clock. But first she needed to understand the context of Willow Cottage and its reclusive mistress, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson. The house, with its shuttered windows and overgrown garden, seemed to hold secrets as tightly as Mrs. Grayson clutched her composure. The village was stirring as Miss Marple stepped onto the high street, her sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-damp grass and freshly baked bread from Mr. Finch's bakery. A few early risers nodded greetings, their faces alight with the previous night's gossip. The murder at Willow Cottage was the talk of St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple's ears caught fragments of speculation as she passed the butcher's shop. Shot and vanished. Just like that, Mr. Carver was saying, his cleaver poised mid-chop. "I reckon it's some city trickster come to make fools of us." His customer, a stout woman in a floral apron, shook her head. "It's Mrs. Grayson I feel for, poor soul. Living alone, in that big house, and now this." Miss Marple smiled politely, but didn't linger. The villagers' chatter was useful, but it was often like sifting through chaff for grain. She made her way to the vicarage, a rambling stone house beside the church, its garden a riot of late summer roses. Mr. Clement was in his study, surrounded by books and papers, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he pored over a sermon. "Miss Marple," he exclaimed, rising with a warm smile. "I hoped you'd come. Last night's affair has left us all in a tizzy. Griselda's convinced it's a plot for a novel, but I'm not so sure." Miss Marple settled into a worn armchair, her knitting in her lap as a prop for her unthreatening air. "It was most unsettling," she agreed, her voice mild. "I was wondering, Mr. Clement, if you might recall anything about Willow Cottage's history. Mrs. Grayson has lived there many years, has she not?" The vicar leaned back, stroking his chin. "Oh yes, since her marriage to Arthur Grayson, nearly 30 years ago. A quiet couple, kept to themselves. Arthur was a solicitor, you know, with a practice in Chipping Cleghorn. but there was a scandal. Oh, about 15 years back, just before he died. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her face betraying nothing but polite interest. A scandal. Mr. Clement hesitated, glancing at the door as if to ensure privacy. It was hushed. Up, of course, but the talk was of a theft. A valuable item jewellery, some said, or perhaps documents went missing from Willow Cottage. Arthur was beside himself, accused a servant, but nothing was proven. The servant left the village, and the matter was dropped. Soon after, Arthur took ill and passed away. Eleanor's been alone ever since. Miss Marple's mind turned over this new thread. A theft, unresolved, could fester like a wound, drawing greed or vengeance years later, and no one was ever caught. She asked. Not that I know of, Mr. Clement replied. The village had its theories, of course. Some pointed to a drifter who'd been seen about that time, others to a family dispute. Arthur's brother, Lionel, was mentioned. He'd fallen out with Arthur over money, I believe. But Lionel moved to Canada, and the talk died down. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the name Lionel Grayson. A family dispute could be a potent motive, and the timing of the theft, so close to Arthur's death, was suggestive. And Mrs. Grayson, how did she bear it? She withdrew, Mr. Clement said sadly. Closed the house, stopped attending village events. She's only started coming to church again these past few years, always in that black veil, like she's still mourning. Thanking him, Miss Marple took her leave, her thoughts buzzing. The vicarage gate creaked as she stepped into the churchyard, where ancient yews cast long shadows. The theft at Willow Cottage was a piece of the puzzle, she was certain, and the advertisement might be its echo, stirring old ghosts. But she needed more, something tangible to connect the past to the present. Her next stop was the village library, a modest building staffed by Miss Eliza Withers, a spinster with a passion for local history. The library smelled of old paper and polish, its shelves crammed with books and yellowing newspapers. Miss Withers, peering over her half-moon glasses, greeted Miss Marple with a nod. Hear about that dreadful business at Willow Cottage, I suppose, she said, her voice sharp. The whole village is in an uproar. Indeed, Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. I was hoping to look at some old editions of the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette, perhaps from 15 years ago. I'm curious about the village's history. Miss Withers raised an eyebrow, but led her to a back room where bound volumes of the Gazette were stored. 15 years, you say? That'd be around 1960. I'll fetch the volumes, but they're dusty, mind your dress. Alone with the newspapers, Miss Marple turned the brittle pages with care. Her fingers paused on an article dated August 12, 1960, headlined, Mystery Theft at Willow Cottage. The report was brief but telling. A sapphire brooch, a Grayson family heirloom, had vanished during a dinner party. Suspicion fell on a housemaid, Mary Dobbs, who left St. Mary Mead soon after, but no evidence was found. The article hinted at family tensions, noting Arthur Grayson's refusal to involve the police, claiming it a private matter. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Mary Dobbs related to the postman, perhaps, and Arthur's reluctance to involve the authorities suggested he knew or feared something more. She jotted a note in her book, then turned to another article, a small obituary for Arthur Grayson, dated 3 months later. It described him as a respected solicitor, survived by his wife Eleanor and estranged brother Lionel. No mention of the theft, but the timing was too close for coincidence. As she closed the volume, Miss Withers returned, carrying a tray of tea. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, vaguely accepting a cup. "Do you recall the Grayson theft, Miss Withers? It must have caused quite a stir." "Oh, it did," Miss Withers said, settling into a chair. "The village was full of talk. Some said Mary Dobbs took the brooch to spite Mrs. Grayson. Was a proud one. Mary didn't take kindly to being ordered about. Others thought it was Lionel Grayson sneaking back to settle old scores. But no one could prove anything, and Mrs. Grayson shut herself away after Arthur died." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. The brooch, the family rift, the servant's departure, all threads leading back to Willow Cottage. The advertisement, with its bold promise of murder, might be a taunt, a way to reopen old wounds. But why now? And who was the stranger, with his cryptic note and staged collapse? As she left the library, Miss Marple's path took her past the post office, where a chance encounter added another piece to the puzzle. Clara Beaumont emerged, a letter in her hand, her face pale. She started at the sight of Miss Marple, then forced a smile. Miss Marple, out for a walk. Her voice was bright, but her eyes were troubled. "Merely stretching my legs," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle. "You seem unsettled, my dear. Is everything all right?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the letter. "It's nothing, really. Just, I've been getting these odd notes, anonymous, slipped under my door at the inn. They tell me to leave St. Mary Mead, or else." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her expression remained kind. "How distressing. Have you shown them to anyone?" "Not yet," Clara admitted. "I thought they were a joke at first, but after last night—" She trailed off, glancing at the letter in her hand. "This one came today. Its difference says I'm in danger if I stay for the next act. May I see it, Miss?" Marple asked, her voice soft but firm. Clara handed her the letter. A single sheet of cheap paper with typed words. "Leave St. Mary Mead before the next act, or you'll regret it." The typeface was uneven, as if from an old machine, and Miss Marple noted a faint smudge of ink, similar to the scrap from Willow Cottage. "This is most concerning," she said, returning the letter. "You must be careful, Miss Beaumont, and perhaps keep this to yourself, for navelage tongues can be unkind." Clara nodded, her face a mix of gratitude and fear. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I don't know why anyone would target me. I only came here to settle my aunt's estate." "Your aunt?" Miss Marple's tone was casual, but her interest quickened. "Yes, my aunt, Margaret Beaumont. She lived in Chipping Cleghorn, died last month. I'm here to sort out her papers, but I keep feeling—" Watched, Miss Marple patted her arm. "Try not to worry, my dear. These things have a way of coming clear." But as Clara walked away, Miss Marple's mind was alight. Clara's presence in St. Mary Mead, so soon after the advertisement, was no coincidence. And the mention of an estate suggested money, a motive as old as time. Back at Lilac Cottage, Miss Marple spread her notes on the table, the scrap from Willow Cottage beside Clara's letter. The similarity in the ink smudge was striking, hinting at a single source. She recalled the vicar's tale of the theft, the library's article, and Clara's anonymous warnings. The past was reaching into the present, she was sure, and the stranger's appearance was a deliberate spark, meant to ignite something hidden She resolved to visit Mr. Langley, the solicitor, tomorrow, to inquire about Arthur Grayson's will, and any connection to Clara's aunt. For now, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The theft at Willow Cottage was the key, and the advertisement was its echo, designed to draw someone or something out of the shadows. The chapter closed with Miss Marple's determination to unravel the next thread. Her discovery of the theft's history, a small but vital step toward the truth. Chapter 4. The hidden room. The afternoon light spilled through the leaded windows of Willow Cottage, casting diamond patterns on the worn parquet floor. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles clicking softly, a cup of Earl Grey cooling on the table beside her. Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, the cottage's reclusive mistress, had invited her for tea, an unexpected gesture that Miss Marple accepted with her usual blend of curiosity and caution. The invitation had come via a note delivered by the postman that morning, its polite phrasing tinged with a hint of urgency. Miss Marple sensed an opportunity not just for tea, but for insight into the heart of the mystery that had begun with the cryptic advertisement in the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette. The room was much as it had been 2 nights ago, when the stranger's dramatic entrance and the staged gunshot had left the village abuzz. The air still held a faint trace of wood smoke, and the heavy velvet curtains seemed to absorb sound, lending the space an oppressive quiet. Mrs. Grayson sat opposite, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her black dress stark against the faded chintz of her chair. Her face, framed by a lace cap, was pale, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an interruption. "Thank you for coming, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low but steady. "I felt I owed you an explanation after that dreadful evening. The whole village must think me mad, hosting such a spectacle." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes keen behind their mild facade. "Not at all, Mrs. Grayson. It's the advertisement that's caused the stir, not you. Have you learned anything more about who placed it?" Mrs. Grayson shook her head, her fingers twisting a silver ring. "Nothing. The Gazette said it was paid for anonymously, as you know. I can't imagine why anyone would choose my home for such a cruel jest." "Perhaps it's not a jest," Miss Marple said softly, her needles pausing. "The stranger seemed genuinely distressed, and that note he carried, did you see it?" Mrs. Grayson's eyes widened, then flickered away. Only briefly. It looked like nonsense, scribbled in haste. "I assumed it was part of the act." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple noted the hesitation, as if she were guarding a half-truth. The conversation turned to safer topics: village gossip, the weather, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The theft of the sapphire brooch 15 years ago, the anonymous letters to Clara Beaumont, the stranger's warning of beware the shadow. Each was a thread in a tapestry. She was only beginning to discern, Mrs. Grayson's unease suggested. She knew more than she admitted, and Miss Marple resolved to explore Willow Cottage further, if opportunity allowed. As Mrs. Grayson rose to fetch more tea, Miss Marple seized her chance. "What a charming room," she said, standing and drifting toward a bookcase lined with leather-bound volumes. "These must hold so many memories. May I look?" Mrs. Grayson hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, they were my husband's, mostly. He loved history." Miss Marple's fingers trailed along the spines, her eyes scanning not just the books, but the room itself. The bookcase was heavy, its base flush against the wall, but a faint draught brushed her ankles, hinting at something unusual. She pressed gently against the wood, and to her surprise, A panel shifted with a soft click. A narrow gap appeared, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. Her heart quickened, but she kept her expression serene. "Oh, how curious," she murmured, as if admiring the craftsmanship. Mrs. Grayson, returning with the teapot, froze, her eyes widening. "That's just an old storage space," she said quickly, setting the pot down with a clatter. "Nothing of interest, I'm sure." But Miss Marple's curiosity was aflame. "May I see? I do love old houses and their secrets." Her tone was light, almost playful, but her gaze was steady. Mrs. Grayson hesitated, then relented, perhaps fearing refusal would raise suspicion. She pulled the bookcase further, revealing a narrow door, its paint chipped and hinges rusty. "It's been locked for years," she said, her voice tight. "I don't even know where the key is." Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, but her eyes caught the glint of a small keyhole. She made a mental note to return to this discovery, sensing it was no mere storage space. Before she could press further, a sharp knock at the front door startled them both. Mrs. Grayson hurried to answer it. Leaving Miss Marple alone, seizing the moment, she slipped through the narrow door, her torch casting a thin beam into the gloom. The space was small, barely a closet, its air thick with dust and the musty scent of old paper. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with yellowed letters, a tarnished silver box, and a leather-bound diary, its lock glinting in the torchlight. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the diary, her pulse quickening. This was no ordinary hiding place. It was a vault of secrets, preserved and forgotten. A noise from the drawing-room, Mrs. Grayson's voice, sharp with surprise cut through her thoughts. Miss Marple pocketed the diary's key, a small brass thing half hidden among the letters, and stepped back into the drawing-room just as Dr. Philip Harrow entered, his medical bag in hand. "Miss Marple," he said, his smile charming but strained. "I didn't expect to see you here." His eyes flicked to the bookcase, now closed, and Miss Marple wondered if he'd noticed its slight misalignment. "Dr. Harrow," she replied, her tone warm. "Just enjoying Mrs. Grayson's hospitality." "Are you here on a professional call?" He nodded, setting his bag on a table. "Mrs. Grayson's been under strain since Friday. I thought a checkup might ease her mind." Mrs. Grayson returned. Her face flushed. "It's kind of you, doctor, but I'm quite well. Just unsettled." Miss Marple observed the exchange, noting Dr. Harrow's quick glance around the room, as if searching for something. His presence, so soon after her discovery, felt too convenient. Had he come to check on Mrs. Grayson, or to ensure something remained hidden? She resumed her seat, her knitting a soothing rhythm, but her mind was alight with possibilities. The conversation turned to village matters, but Miss Marple steered it gently toward the past. "Mrs. Grayson," she said, "Mr. Clement mentioned your husband's interest in history. Did he collect anything, documents, perhaps, or family heirlooms?" Mrs. Grayson's hands stilled. "He kept records, yes. Legal papers, mostly. They're stored away, of no interest to anyone now." Dr. Harrow cleared his throat. "Old papers can be fascinating, though. I've heard Willow Cottage has quite a history. Any hidden treasures tucked away?" His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, and Miss Marple felt a prickle of suspicion. "Nothing of value," Mrs. Grayson said quickly, her voice tight. "Just dust and memories." Miss Marple smiled, letting the subject drop, but her mind was racing. The hidden room, the diary, the quiche, was certain they held clues to the theft of the sapphire brooch, and perhaps the stranger's warning. Dr. Harrow's interest in the cottage's history was telling, and she wondered what he sought. Was he connected to the theft, or to the anonymous letters threatening Clara Beaumont? As tea concluded, Miss Marple took her leave, her handbag heavier with the weight of the key. The lane outside Willow Cottage was quiet, the late afternoon, sun gilding the hedgerows. She walked slowly, her thoughts turning over the day's discoveries. The hidden room was a revelation, but it raised more questions than answers. Why had it been sealed? And why was Mrs. Grayson so reluctant to discuss it? Her path took her past the village inn, where Clara Beaumont stood on the steps, her face pale as she spoke to Peter Langley, the solicitor's son. Their voices were low, but Miss Marple's hearing was as sharp as ever. "I can't stay here, Peter," Clara was saying, her voice trembling. "Another letter came this morning, same typewriter, same threats. It mentioned Willow Cottage, said I'd find answers there, but it's dangerous." Peter's hand rested on her arm, his face earnest. "You should go to the police, Clara, or let my father look into it. He knows everyone's secrets." Miss Marple paused, pretending to adjust her scarf, her ears straining. Clara's letters, typed like the advertisement, suggested a single hand behind the mystery, and the mention of Willow Cottage was no coincidence. It was the nexus of the puzzle, its hidden room, a vault of truths waiting to be unlocked. She continued home, her mind weaving connections. The theft of the brooch, the estranged brother Lionel, the anonymous letters, the stranger's note all pointed to a past grievance resurfacing. Dr. Harrow's presence at Willow Cottage, so soon after her discovery, suggested he was more than a concerned physician, and Mrs. Grayson's evasiveness hinted at a secret she was desperate to keep at Lilac Cottage. Miss Marple lit a lamp and examined the key, its brass surface etched with a tiny Cresta lion rampant, the Grayson family emblem. The diary, she was certain, held answers, but she would need to return to Willow Cottage to retrieve it, a task requiring tact and timing. For now, she jotted notes in her book, sketching the web of connections, the theft, the advertisement, the stranger, the hidden room. She recalled a similar case in her youth, when a hidden compartment in a neighbor's desk had revealed a will that appended a family. Secrets, she knew, had a way of burrowing deep, only to surface when least expected. The advertisement was a spark, designed to ignite a long-dormant truth, and Miss Marple was determined to trace its source. Tomorrow she would visit Mr. Langley, the solicitor, to inquire about Arthur Grayson's will and any link to Clara's. Aunt Margaret Beaumont. The mention of an estate suggested inheritance, a motive as potent as greed or revenge. For now, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The hidden room was a breakthrough, its contents a promise of revelation. The chapter closed with Miss Marple's resolve to unlock the diary's secrets, her discovery a vital step toward unraveling the mystery of Willow Cottage. Chapter 5. The doctor's secret. The village of St. Mary Mead lay bathed in the golden glow of a late summer morning, its cottages glowing like honey in the sunlight. Miss Jane Marple walked briskly along the high street, her handbag swinging. Gently, the small brass key from Willow Cottage's hidden room tucked safely inside. Her mind was a whirl of threads. The sapphire brooch, stolen 15 years ago. The anonymous letters threatening Clara Beaumont, the stranger's cryptic warning, and the locked diary she had glimpsed behind the bookcase. Each clue pointed to a past wrong, stirred to life by the mysterious advertisement in the chipping Cleghorn Gazette. Today, she aimed to unravel a new thread, the enigmatic Dr. Philip Harrow, whose timely appearance at Willow Cottage yesterday had felt less like coincidence and more like calculation. Miss Marple's destination was the village shop, where Mrs. Tuttle presided over jars of sweets and gossip with equal relish. The shop was a hub of St. Mary Mead's chatter, and Mrs. Tuttle's knack for collecting rumours made her a valuable, if unwitting, ally. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple entered, her sensible shoes whispering on the worn floorboards. Mrs. Tuttle looked up from her ledger, her round face alight with curiosity. "Miss Marple come to stock up on wool, or is it last night's talk at Willow Cottage that brings you?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling with that deceptive mildness that disarmed the wary. "A bit of both, perhaps. I was wondering what you know about Dr. Harrow. He seems quite devoted to Mrs. Grayson's well-being." Mrs. Tuttle's eyes gleamed, sensing a chance to share her trove of village lore. "Devoted, you say? Well, he's a charming one, I'll give him that, but there's something not quite right about him. Came to St. Mary Mead 6 months ago, straight from London, after some hush-hush business. My cousin's friend in the city says he left his practice under a cloud something about a patient, though no one's clear what he's been poking about Willow Cottage more than a doctor ought, if you ask me." Miss Marple's needles, which she had drawn from her bag as a prop, clicked softly. "Indeed, and has he shown interest in anything particular there?" Mrs. Tuttle leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Books, of all things. He asked me last week if I knew where old Mr. Grayson's papers were kept. Said he was researching local history, but I didn't buy it. Those eyes of his sharp as knives, always watching." Miss Marple nodded, filing away this nugget. Dr. Harrow's interest in Arthur Grayson's papers aligned too neatly with the hidden room and its locked diary. Was he after the same secrets she sought, or something else entirely? Thanking Mrs. Tuttle, she purchased a skein of blue wool and stepped back into the sunlight, her thoughts turning to the village fete, where she might observe Dr. Harrow in a less guarded moment. The fete was in full swing on the village green, a patchwork of stalls and laughter under a canopy of bunting. Children darted about, clutching toffee apples, while Mr. Finch hawked his pies with theatrical flair. Miss Marple wandered among the crowd, her eyes scanning for familiar faces. She spotted Clara Beaumont near a stall selling embroidered linens, her green coat a splash of colour against the muted tones of the village. Beside her stood Dr. Harrow, his head bent close, their conversation hushed but intense. Miss Marple drifted closer, pretending to admire a tray of homemade jams. Her ears, sharp as ever, caught fragments of their exchange. "You can't keep this up, Clara," Dr. Harrow was saying, his voice low and urgent. "It's too dangerous. You don't know what you're stirring up." Clara's reply was sharp, her eyes flashing. "I have every right to know, Philip. If it's true, it changes everything. You can't stop me." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. A shared secret, then, between the heiress and the doctor. But what? Something tied to Willow Cottage, perhaps, or to Clara's aunt, Margaret Beaumont, whose estate had brought her to St. Mary Mead. The mention of danger echoed the anonymous letters, and Miss Marple wondered if Dr. Harrow was warning Clara or threatening her, before she could hear more. The pair moved off, swallowed by the crowd. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with Clara later, but for now she focused on Dr. Harrow. His past in London, shrouded in scandal, was a thread she needed to pull. She recalled Mrs. Tuttle's hint of a disgraced patient, perhaps a clue. Lay there, her opportunity came later that afternoon, when she found herself seated beside Mrs. Griselda Clement at the tea tent. The vicar's wife, young and lively, was a fount of gossip, her tongue loosened by a second scone. "Griselda, my dear," Miss Marple began, her tone as warm as the tea. "You've been in London recently, haven't you? Did you ever hear anything about Dr. Harrow's time there? He seems such a mystery." Griselda's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Oh, Miss Marple, you're sniffing out a story, aren't you? I did hear a whisper at a friend's salon in Chelsea. They said Dr. Harrow was let go from a posh clinic after a patient accused him of tampering with her records. Something about a will or an inheritance. She was quite wealthy, you see. The clinic hushed it up, but he left soon after. No charges, mind you, but mud sticks." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was alight. A scandal involving a will, an inheritance too close to the Grayson theft and Clara's estate to be coincidence. Was Dr. Harrow's interest in Willow Cottage tied to his past, or to the sapphire brooch, and why his urgency with Clara? As the fate wound down, Miss Marple made her way to Lilac Cottage, her thoughts buzzing. The key in her handbag felt heavier now, a promise of answers locked in the diary. She settled by the fire, her notebook open, and began to decipher the diary's significance. The hidden room, with its letters and locked diary, suggested Arthur Grayson had guarded something valuable, perhaps evidence of the theft or a clue to its perpetrator. Dr. Harrow's probing suggested he knew of it. To dot her musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Clara Beaumont, her face pale, her eyes wide with agitation. "Miss Marple, I'm sorry to barge in, but I didn't know where else to go," she said, clutching a folded paper. Another letter came, and it's worse. Miss Marple ushered her inside, offering tea to steady her nerves. "Show me, my dear," she said gently. Clara unfolded the paper, its typed words stark. "The truth lies in the shadows of Willow Cottage. Find it, or pay the price." The typeface matched the previous letters, and Miss Marple noted a faint watermark, a lion rampant, like the crest on the diary's key. "This is most serious," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. "Have you spoken to Dr. Harrow about these?" Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the paper. "He knows about the first ones. He told me to ignore them, said they were probably a prank. But today, at the fete, he seemed different, like he was afraid for me." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Afraid for Clara, or afraid of what she might uncover? She patted Clara's hand. "Leave this with me, my dear, and stay at the inn tonight. Don't go wandering alone." After Clara left, Miss Marple returned to her notes, adding Dr. Harrow's London scandal to the web. The diary, she was certain, held the key to the theft, and perhaps to the strangers. Warning, she resolved to return to Willow Cottage, but discreetly. She needed the diary itself, not just its key. That evening, as the village settled into dusk, Miss Marple took a quiet walk, her torch casting a soft glow. Her path led past Willow Cottage, its windows dark except for a single light in an upstairs room. As she paused, pretending to adjust her scarf, she saw a figure move in the garden, a man, tall and lean, his coat blending with the shadows. Dr. Harrow, she realized, her heart quickening. He lingered by the side door, his movements furtive, then slipped inside. Miss Marple's lips pursed. He was searching, she was sure, for the same secrets she sought. The hidden room, the diary, the brooch. Dr. Harrow was no bystander in this mystery. She made a mental note to watch him closely, perhaps even to enlist the constable's help if needed. Back at Lilac Cottage, she lit a lamp and examined the key again, its crest glinting in the firelight. The diary, she suspected, contained more than family history. It might reveal the thief's identity, or a motive for the advertisement. Dr. Harrow's past, with its whispers of tampered records and disputed inheritances, suggested he had a stake in Willow Cottage's secrets, and Clara's letters, with their matching watermark, tied her to the same web. Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth, when a doctor in a neighbouring village had forged a patient's will to secure a legacy. The parallels were striking, but she needed proof. Tomorrow she would visit Mr. Langley, the solicitor, to probe Arthur Grayson's will and any connection to Clara's aunt. For now, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Dr. Harrow's secret was coming into focus, a vital step toward unraveling the mystery. The chapter closed with her resolve to retrieve the diary, certain it held the next clue to the truth. Chapter 6. The Midnight Intruder. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its silver light casting long shadows across the sleeping village. Miss Jane Marple sat by her bedroom window at Lilac Cottage, her knitting abandoned on the table, her eyes fixed on the darkened lane. The brass key from Willow Cottage's hidden room lay in her hand, its lion rampant crest cool against her palm. The events of the past days, the stranger's warning, the anonymous letters to Clara Beaumont, Dr. Harrow's furtive visit to Willow Cottage wove a tightening net around the mystery of the newspaper advertisement. Tonight, Miss Marple sensed the threads were drawing closer, and she was not one to sleep when answers beckoned. A distant church clock struck 11, its chimes soft but clear. She had spent the evening reviewing her notes, the cryptic words from the stranger's scrap, "Beware the shadow, trust no one," echoing alongside Clara's latest letter, with its warning of the truth in the shadows of Willow Cottage. Dr. Harrow's London scandal, tied to a disputed inheritance, and his interest in Arthur Grayson's papers suggested he was hunting something specific. The hidden room, with its locked diary, was the key, she was certain. But retrieving it required stealth and, perhaps, a touch of daring. Her musings were interrupted by a faint cry from the direction of Willow Cottage, carried on the night breeze. It was sharp, almost stifled, like a shout cut short. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She slipped the key into her pocket, donned a dark shawl over her nightdress, and took her torch, its beam a thin reassurance against the dark. The village was no place for a lady to wander at midnight, but Miss Marple's resolve was stronger than propriety. The lane to Willow Cottage was quiet, the hedgerows whispering in the wind. As she approached, the house loomed, its windows black, save for a faint flicker in the upstairs hall. She paused by the garden gate, her torch off, her eyes adjusting to the moonlight. A rustle came from the shrubbery, and she froze, her breath catching. A figure emerged, low and swift, darting toward the side door. It was too dark to see clearly, but the silhouette was tall, cloaked in a long coterie like the stranger. From Friday night, Miss Marple's mind raced. An intruder, at this hour, suggested more than idle curiosity. She crept closer, keeping to the shadows, her shoes silent on the grass. The side door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the path. She hesitated, then slipped inside, her torch gripped tightly. The house was still, but the air held a tension, like a bowstring drawn taut. The hallway was dim, the only light coming from a half-open door to the drawing room. Miss Marple moved carefully, avoiding the creaky floorboards she'd noted during her tea with Mrs. Grayson. A muffled thud came from upstairs, followed by a low curse. She paused, her torch unlit, relying on her ears. The sound was coming from the direction of the hidden room behind the bookcase. Before she could decide her next move, a louder noise, a crash, like glass breaking, echoed through the house. A woman's voice, sharp with panic, cried out, "Who's there?" It was Mrs. Grayson, her tone raw with fear. Footsteps pounded down the stairs, and Miss Marple pressed herself against the wall, her heart thudding. The figure from the garden appeared, a dark shape hurtling toward the side door. In the moonlight, she caught a glimpse of a scarf masking their face, but the coat was unmistakably long, dark, like the stranger's. They vanished into the night, leaving the door swinging. Miss Marple waited, counting to 10, then moved to the drawing room, where she found Mrs. Grayson clutching a poker, her face ashen. "Miss Marple." Mrs. Grayson gasped, lowering the poker. "What are you doing here?" "I heard a cry," Miss Marple said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I was passing by and thought you might need help." Mrs. Grayson sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Someone was in the house. I woke to footsteps, then a crash upstairs. I thought it was that dreadful stranger again." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room. The bookcase was undisturbed, but a vase lay shattered on the floor, its fragments glinting in the firelight. "Did you see them?" she asked. "Only a shadow," Mrs. Grayson whispered. "They ran when I shouted. Oh, Miss Marple, what is happening to my home?" Miss Marple patted her arm, her mind racing. "We must call the constable. But first, let's see what they were after." She moved to the bookcase, her fingers finding the hidden catch. The panel clicked open, revealing the narrow door to the hidden room. Mrs. Grayson's eyes widened. "How did you, a lucky guess," Miss Marple said, her tone light. She stepped into the room, her torch illuminating the dusty shelves. The letters and silver box were untouched, but the locked diary was gone. In its place was a single photograph, slipped from its frame, showing a younger Mrs. Grayson with a Manatha, presumably standing beside a woman with Clara Beaumont's striking features. Miss Marple's breath caught. The woman could be Margaret Beaumont, Clara's aunt. She tucked the photograph into her shawl, closing the panel as Mrs. Grayson watched, too shaken to protest. "We'll leave this for the constable," Miss Marple said. "But I think it's time we had some answers." Constable Barnes arrived within the hour, his notebook open, his face grim. He examined the side door, noting a forced lock, and collected the broken vase for evidence. "Looks like a burglary gone wrong," he said, scratching his head. "But nothing stolen, you say?" "Nothing I can see," Mrs. Grayson replied, her voice unsteady. "Just the mess upstairs, a window broken in the guest room." Miss Marple said little, her thoughts on the missing diary and the photograph. The intruder had been after something specific, and the diary's absence confirmed its importance. She suspected Dr. Harrow, whose late-night visit she'd glimpsed yesterday, but the scarf and coat suggested the stranger or someone posing as him. The photograph, with its link to Clara's aunt, was a new clue, tying the past to the present. As dawn broke, Miss Marple walked home, the photograph and key heavy in her bag. At Lilac Cottage, she spread her finds on the table, studying the image. The woman beside Arthur Grayson had Clara's high cheekbones and dark eyes, but her expression was guarded, almost wary. The back of the photograph bore a faded inscription: Eleanor, Arthur, Margaret, 1958. Margaret Beaumont. Then had known the Graysons, perhaps intimately. Was she connected to the sapphire brooch's theft, or to the family rift with Lionel Grayson? Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Mrs. Tuttle's gossip about the stranger. Seen near the postbox before the advertisement appeared, she visited the shop later that morning, finding Mrs. Tuttle arranging jars of marmalade. Her eyes alight with the night's news. Another uproar at Willow Cottage, Mrs. Tuttle exclaimed, wiping her hands. Constable Barnes was in earlier, said it was a break-in, did you hear? I was there, Miss Marple said, her tone mild. Most distressing for Mrs. Grayson. You mentioned a stranger near the postbox before the advertisement. Could you describe him? Mrs. Tuttle's face lit up, eager to share. Tommy Pierce saw him, late at night, in a long coat and scarf. Couldn't see his face, mind you, but he was tall, moved quick. I reckon it's the same fellow from Friday, stirring trouble again. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. The stranger's reappearance, or someone mimicking him, suggested a deliberate pattern. She thanked Mrs. Tuttle and headed to the inn, hoping to catch Clara Beaumont before she left for the day. Clara was in the lounge, her face pale, a cup of untouched tea before her. Miss Marple, she said, rising. I heard about the break-in. Is Mrs. Grayson all right? She's shaken but unharmed, Miss Marple replied, settling beside her. Clara, I found something last night, a photograph of your aunt, Margaret Beaumont, with the Graysons. Do you know of any connection? Clara's eyes widened, her hands tightening on her cup. My aunt. She never mentioned the Graysons, but she lived in Chipping Cleghorn years ago, before I was born. She left after some falling out, wouldn't talk about it. Why would her picture be at Willow Cottage? Miss Marple's voice was gentle but probing. Perhaps it's tied to the theft, or to your aunt's estate. Have you found anything in her papers that might explain it? Clara shook her head. I've only started sorting them. There's a box of letters at the solicitor's, but I haven't looked yet, do you think? Could this be why I'm getting those threats? It's possible, Miss Marple said, but we must be cautious. Keep those letters safe, and let me know what you find. As Clara nodded, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to her next move. The missing diary was a setback, but the photograph was a breakthrough, linking Clara's aunt to Willow Cottage's past. She resolved to set a trap for the intruder, perhaps by spreading word that she'd found something valuable, bait to draw them out. That afternoon, she visited Constable Barnes, sharing just enough to ensure his cooperation. I believe the intruder was after something specific, she said, her tone earnest. If we let it be known that a clue was found a document, perhaps it might flush them out. Barnes, though skeptical, agreed to spread the word discreetly, via Mrs. Tuttle's inevitable gossip. Miss Marple returned home, her plan in motion. The intruder, whether Dr. Harrow or the stranger, would act again, she was sure, and she would be ready as night fell. She sat by her window, the photograph and key before her. The mystery was tightening, each clue a step closer to the truth. The theft, the advertisement, the hidden room all pointed to a secret buried in Willow Cottage's past, and the intruder's desperation confirmed its value. Miss Marple recalled a case from her youth, when a stolen locket had led to a midnight chase, revealing a family's betrayal. This felt similar, but grander, with higher stakes. The chapter closed with Miss Marple's quiet satisfaction. The photograph and the trap were vital steps, setting the stage for the intruder's next move. She would watch and wait, certain the truth was within reach. Chapter 7. The Confession. The twilight air of St. Mary Mead carried a chill, as if the village itself sensed the gathering storm of secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire at Lilac Cottage, the brass key and the photograph from Willow Cottage spread before her on the table. The photograph, showing a younger Eleanor Grayson, her husband Arthur, and Margaret Beaumont Clara's aunt, had stirred a new thread in the mystery. The midnight intruder's theft of the locked diary confirmed its significance, and Miss Marple's trap, set through Constable Barnes's discreet whispers, was now in motion. She had let it be known, via Mrs. Tuttle's eager tongue, that a valuable document had been found at Willow Cottage. Hoping to lure the intruder into the open, her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. It was Constable Barnes. His face flushed from the evening cold, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping inside, "your plan worked faster than I expected. There's been a development at the Inn Clara Beaumonts waiting to speak. With you. Says it's urgent." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. Clara, at this hour. She gathered her shawl and handbag, slipping the key and photograph inside. "Lead on, Constable." The inn was a warm glow. In the dusk, its windows spilling light onto the cobblestones. Inside, Clara Beaumont sat in a corner of the lounge, her hands clasped tightly, her face pale as moonlight. Her green coat hung loosely on the chair, and a crumpled letter lay before her, its typed words stark against the cheap paper. Miss Marple noted the familiar lion rampant watermark, matching the one on the stranger's scrap and Clara's earlier threats. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice trembling, "I couldn't wait. I did something foolish, and now I'm afraid it's all gone wrong." Miss Marple settled beside her, her tone gentle but firm. "Tell me everything, my dear. Start at the beginning." Clara took a shaky breath, her eyes darting to the constable, who stood discreetly by the door. "It was me," she whispered. "I placed the advertisement in the Gazette. I thought it would force the truth out about my aunt, about Willow Cottage. But I didn't expect that stranger, or the gunshot, or the break-in." Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag as a calming prop, clicked softly. "The advertisement. Why, Clara? What truth were you seeking?" Clara's fingers twisted the letter. "My aunt, Margaret Beaumont, left me her estate, but her papers hinted at something hidden, a debt or a promise tied to the Grayson. She wrote in her diary about a wrong done at Willow Cottage, something she regretted but never explained. When I came to St. Mary Mead, I found a letter among her things, addressed to Arthur Grayson, accusing him of betrayal. I thought, if I stirred things up, someone would reveal what happened." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained kind. "And the advertisement was your way of stirring?" Clara nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I used an old typewriter at the inn, sent the note anonymously. I thought it would make Mrs. Grayson talk, or someone else who knew about the theft of the sapphire brooch all those years ago. But then that stranger appeared, and the letters started coming, threatening me to stop. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." Miss Marple's mind raced. Clara's confession explained the advertisement, but not the stranger, the gunshot, or the stolen diary. The typed letters, with their matching watermark, suggested someone else had seized Clara's gambit, twisting it to their own ends. "These letters," she said, gesturing to the paper, "did you show them to Dr. Harrow?" Clara hesitated. "Yes, the first ones. He said they were nonsense, told me to leave it alone. But last night, after the break-in, he came to the inn. Warned me to leave St. Mary Mead, he said. He said he knew who was behind it, but he wouldn't tell me." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Dr. Harrow's involvement was growing clearer, his warnings to Clara tinged with fear or guilt. She patted Clara's hand. "You were brave to tell me, my dear. But you must be careful. Stay here tonight, and let Constable Barnes keep watch." As Clara nodded, Miss Marple turned to the constable. "We must search Willow Cottage again, but discreetly. The intruder took the diary, but they may return, thinking we've found something else." Barnes agreed, and they set out for Willow Cottage, the village now cloaked in night. The house stood silent, its windows dark except for a faint glow in the drawing-room. Mrs. Grayson answered their knock, her face drawn, a shawl draped over her shoulders. "Miss Marple." "Constable," she said, her voice quavering. "What's happened now?" "A precaution, Mrs. Grayson," Miss Marple said smoothly. "We've had word of another possible intruder. May we look around?" Mrs. Grayson hesitated, then stepped aside, her eyes flickering with unease. Miss Marple led the way to the drawing-room, her torch ready, though she kept it off. The bookcase, hiding the secret room, was undisturbed, but a faint scuff mark on the floor suggested recent movement. She glanced at Barnes, who nodded, his hand on his truncheon. As they searched the ground floor, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the photograph. Margaret Beaumont's presence in it, alongside Arthur and Eleanor Grayson, hinted at a deeper connection, perhaps a shared secret or a betrayal tied to the brooch's theft. Clara's admission that she placed the advertisement was a breakthrough, but it raised new questions. Who had exploited her ploy, and why? Upstairs, they found the guest room where the intruder had broken the window. The shards were swept into a pile, but Miss Marple noticed something newer, faint trace of red wax on the windowsill, as if a seal had been pressed there. She knelt, her fingers brushing the residue. "Curious," she murmured, slipping a sample into her handkerchief. Back in the drawing-room, Mrs. Grayson was pacing, her hands wringing. "I can't bear this," she said, her voice breaking. "First that dreadful advertisement, then the stranger, now another break-in. Why my home?" Miss Marple's tone was soothing. "We're close to answers, Mrs. Grayson, but I must ask, did you know Margaret Beaumont well? I found a photograph of you with her and your husband." Mrs. Grayson froze, her eyes wide. "Margaret, she was a friend years ago. We drifted apart after Arthur's death. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple showed her the photograph, watching her reaction. Mrs. Grayson's face crumpled, and she sank into a chair. "That was a happier time," she whispered. "Margaret was close to us, almost family. But there was a falling out over money. She never forgave Arthur." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. The falling out, the theft, the advertisement, all were linked, she was sure, and the diary held the key. She resolved to tighten her trap, spreading word through Mrs. Tuttle that the document was now at Lilac Cottage, under lock and key. The next morning, the village buzzed with news of the break-in, Mrs. Tuttle's shop a hive of speculation. Miss Marple stopped by, casually mentioning the document to ensure the bait spread. "It's quite safe," she said, her eyes twinkling, but most revealing. "I expect we'll know more soon." As she left, she spotted Dr. Harrow across the street, his face taut as he spoke to Peter Langley. Their conversation was brief, but Miss Marple caught the doctor's glance toward her, sharp and wary. She smiled benignly, her mind racing. Dr. Harrow was rattled, and her trap was working. That afternoon, she visited Mr. Langley, the solicitor, at his office in Chipping Cleghorn. His desk was piled with papers, but his manner was warm as he offered. "Her receipt, Miss Marple. To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles. "I'm curious about Arthur Grayson's will," she said, her tone light. "And any connection to Margaret Beaumont. Her niece, Clara, mentioned an estate." Mr. Langley's brow furrowed. Arthur's will was straightforward everything to Eleanor, with a small bequest to his brother, Lionel, who contested it but got nowhere. Margaret Beaumont was a witness to the will, but there was no mention of her in the terms. "I handled her estate recently. They'll left everything to Clara, including some old letters. I haven't seen them, but Clara's sorting through them." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the letter Clara mentioned, accusing Arthur of betrayal, and Lionel Grayson. "Is he still in Canada?" "As far as I know," Mr. Langley said. "He wrote occasionally, asking about Willow Cottage, but nothing recent." Thanking him, Miss Marple returned to St. Mary Mead, her mind weaving connections. The red wax on the window-sill nagged at her seal, perhaps from a letter or package tied to the diary. She recalled a case from her youth, where a wax seal had marked a stolen deed, leading to a confession. This felt similar, a sign of carelessness in the intruder's haste. That evening, she set her trap at Lilac Cottage, placing a locked box, empty but heavy, on her parlour table, visible through the window. She dimmed the lights and waited, her knitting in her lap, her senses alert. The village was quiet, but at 10:30, a shadow moved outside, low and swift. Miss Marple's breath caught as the figure tested her back door, then retreated. Spooked by a passing car, she rose, her torch ready, and slipped outside, following the figure toward the churchyard. In the moonlight, she saw the familiar long coat and scarf, the stranger's guise again. They paused by the EUs, then vanished into the lane. Miss Marple didn't pursue, but her trap had confirmed one thing. The intruder was still in St. Mary Mead, desperate for her document. Back home, she jotted notes, the photograph and key beside her. Clara's confession had clarified the advertisement's origin, but the intruder's persistence suggested a larger game. The diary, the brooch, Margaret Beaumont's falling out, pointed to a secret worth killing for. Miss Marple resolved to confront Mrs. Grayson directly, armed with the photograph and Clara's story. The chapter closed with her quiet satisfaction. The trap had drawn the intruder out, a vital step toward the truth, setting the stage for a final reckoning at Willow Cottage. Chapter 8. The Truth Unraveled. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over St. Mary Mead, gilding the rooftops and softening the edges of Willow Cottage's overgrown garden. Miss Jane Marple stood at the garden gate, her handbag clasped firmly, the brass key and photograph tucked inside. The mystery that had begun with a cryptic advertisement in the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette announcing a murder at Willow Cottage had woven a complex web: the stranger's staged collapse, the stolen diary, Clara Beaumont's anonymous letters, Dr. Philip Harrow's shadowed past, and the long-ago theft of a sapphire brooch. Clara's confession, admitting she placed the advertisement to uncover truths about her Aunt Margaret Beaumont, had been a breakthrough, but the intruder's persistence and the missing diary pointed to a deeper secret. Tonight, Miss Marple had resolved to end it, gathering the key players at Willow Cottage to unravel the truth. She had sent notes to Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, Clara Beaumont, Dr. Harrow, and Constable Barnes, requesting their presence at 7 o'clock, the same hour as the original murder announcement. Mrs. Grayson had agreed, her reply tinged with reluctance, while Clara and Dr. Harrow confirmed with wary brevity. Miss Marple's trap, baited with whispers of a valuable document, had stirred the intruder once. Now, She would use the truth to draw them out for good. The drawing-room of Willow Cottage was much as it had been that fateful Friday, its faded elegance a backdrop to the gathering tension. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the wallpaper, and the heavy bookcase, hiding the secret room, loomed like a silent witness. Mrs. Grayson sat by the hearth, her hands twisting a laced handkerchief, her black dress stark against her pale face. Clara perched on a sofa, her green coat folded beside her, her eyes darting nervously. Dr. Harrow stood by the window, his posture rigid, his charming smile absent. Constable Barnes lingered near the door, his notebook ready, his expression one of cautious anticipation. Mrs. Tuttle, invited for her role as the villagers' gossip hub, hovered near the tea tray, her curiosity barely contained. Miss Marple took a seat near the bookcase, her knitting needles clicking softly, a prop to ease the room's tension. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice gentle but clear. "The events of the past week, the advertisement, the stranger, the break-in, have left us all unsettled. I believe it's time we laid this mystery to rest." Mrs. Gray's lips trembled. "I wish it were over, Miss Marple. My home has become a place of fear." Clara nodded, her voice low. "I never meant for this to happen. I only wanted answers about my aunt." Dr. Harrow's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his hand resting lightly on the window frame. Miss Marple noted his tension, her mind sharp with the threads she was about to weave together. "Let us start with the advertisement," she said, her tone measured. "A murder announced at Willow Cottage, drawing us here that Friday night. We now know Clara placed it, hoping to stir truths about her aunt, Margaret Beaumont, and a wrong tied to this house. But someone seized her ploy, turning it into something more dangerous." Clara flushed, her hands tightening. "I thought it would make Mrs. Grayson talk, or someone who knew about the sapphire brooch stolen 15 years ago. I found a letter among my aunt's papers accusing Arthur Grayson of betrayal. I didn't expect all this." Miss Marple nodded, drawing the photograph from her bag. "This picture, Eleanor, Arthur, and Margaret Beaumont, taken in 1958. A connection. Mrs. Grayson, you said Margaret was a friend, but there was a falling out. Can you tell us more?" Mrs. Grayson's face crumpled, her voice barely a whisper. "Margaret was like a sister, but she and Arthur quarrelled over money a loan she gave us, never repaid. She left St. Mary Mead after the brooch was stolen, blaming Arthur. I thought she'd forgiven us, but perhaps not." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was racing. The brooch, stolen during a dinner party, was never recovered. The servant, Mary Dobbs, was suspected, but no proof was found. Arthur's brother, Lionel, was also mentioned, estranged over money. Yet the diary in the hidden room behind this bookcase, she gestured to the bookcase, held answers until it was stolen during the break-in. Dr. Harrow shifted, his voice sharp. "A diary. What does this have to do with me? I was here to check on Mrs. Grayson's health, nothing more." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her gaze was piercing. "Dr. Harrow, you've shown a keen interest in Willow Cottage's history. Mrs. Tuttle mentioned your questions about Arthur's papers, and I saw you here late one night, moving with purpose. Your past in London, a scandal involving a patient, will suggests a pattern. Were you seeking the diary or something else?" The room tensed, all eyes on Dr. Harrow. His jaw tightened, but he forced a laugh. "This is absurd. I'm a doctor, not a thief. I came to St. Mary Mead for a fresh start, not to chase old gossip. Miss Marple drew the brass key from her bag, its lion rampant crest glinting. This key, found in the hidden room, fits the diary's lock. I believe the diary contained evidence of the brooches, theft perhaps, a confession, or a clue to its hiding place. The intruder took it, but left this photograph, linking Margaret Beaumont to the Grayson and Clara's letters, with their matching watermark, suggest a single hand behind the threats. Mrs. Tuttle gasped, her handkerchief fluttering. You mean someone in this room? Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. Let us recreate that Friday night. The stranger burst in, clutching a note. Beware the shadow. Trust no one. The lights went out, a gunshot sounded, and he vanished. But there was no blood, no body. It was a performance, staged to frighten us, or to distract us. She rose, moving to the bookcase, her fingers finding the hidden catch. The panel clicked open, revealing the narrow door. This room held the diary, letters, and a silver box. The intruder took the diary, but overlooked this. She drew a folded paper from her shawl, a page torn from the diary, found tucked among the letters during her first visit. It's a coded note, written by Arthur Grayson, deciphered with a simple substitution cipher. She unfolded the paper, reading aloud, "The sapphire lies where the lion guards the rose. The lion is the Grayson crest, and the rose Mrs. Grayson's garden, where a stone lion statue stands. I examined it yesterday and found a hidden compartment, empty but for traces of blue velvet, sized for a brooch." Mrs. Grayson gasped, her hand to her mouth. The statue. Arthur loved that garden, but the brooch was stolen. Miss Marple eyes turned to Dr. Harrow. Not stolen, but hidden. Arthur suspected someone, perhaps Margaret or Lionel. He concealed the brooch, leaving the diary as a clue. Dr. Harrow, you knew this, didn't you? Your London scandal involved a forged will, a patient's inheritance redirected. You came to St. Mary Mead, learned of the Grayson theft, and saw a chance to find the brooch of fortune in sapphires. Dr. Harrow's face paled, his hand clenching. This is preposterous. You have no proof. Miss Marple's voice was calm, but relentless. The stranger was your hireling, paid to stage the scene while you searched the hidden room during the blackout. The gunshot was a blank, the note a distraction, but you didn't find the diary that night. When Clara's advertisement stirred the village, you saw your chance. But her letters typed on the same machine you used for your own notes threatened to expose you. You broke in to steal the diary, hoping it pinpointed the brooch. Eyes widened. You sent those letters to scare me away. Dr. Harrow's composure cracked, his voice rising. I warned you to leave, Clara, for your own good. You were meddling in things you didn't understand. Miss Marple stepped closer, her presence commanding. The red wax on the windowsill, from the break-in, matched a seal in your medical bag. Dr. Harrow, I saw it when you visited Mrs. Grayson, and the typewriter at your office, its uneven keys match Clara's letters and the advertisements. Original note, which you intercepted and altered to fit your plan. Constable Barnes moved forward, his hand on his truncheon. Is this true, Doctor? Dr. Harrow's shoulders slumped, his fight draining away. I didn't mean harm. The brooch was a legend in London, a fortune lost in a village scandal. I thought if I found it, I could start over. I hired a man to play the stranger, to create chaos while I searched. The diary was a guess, never found it. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes softening. You underestimated St. Mary Mead, Dr. Harrow. Secrets don't stay buried here. Mrs. Grayson rose, her voice trembling but resolute. I suspected the brooch wasn't stolen. Arthur was secretive, always talking about protecting our legacy. I didn't know where he hid it, but I feared someone would come looking. That's why I stayed shut away. Clara's eyes filled with tears. My aunt's letter. It said Arthur betrayed her, kept the brooch to spite her loan. I just wanted the truth. Miss Marple patted her hand. And you found it, my dear. The brooch is gone, likely taken years ago by someone who deciphered Arthur's clue before us. But the truth is clear, and the danger is past. Constable Barnes took Dr. Harrow into custody, his confession enough to warrant charges for the break-in and threats. As the group dispersed, Mrs. Grayson touched Miss Marple's arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can live in my home again without fear." Miss Marple smiled. Her knitting resumed. "It's human nature, Mrs. Grayson. Greed and secrets make a dangerous brew, but truth has a way of rising." As she walked home under the stars, the village quiet around her, Miss Marple reflected on the case. The advertisement, Clara's desperate bid for answers, had sparked a chain of events, exposing Dr. Harrow's greed and Arthur's long-hidden ruse. The brooch was lost, but the mystery was solved. The shadows dispelled at Lilac Cottage. She lit a lamp, her notes spread before her. She recalled a similar case, years ago, when a hidden jewel had torn a family apart. Human nature, she mused, was as predictable as it was complex. She tucked the photograph and key away, a keepsake of a puzzle unraveled, and settled by the fire, her knitting a quiet rhythm in the stillness. The mystery of Willow Cottage was closed, its secrets laid bare. St. Mary Mead would talk for weeks. But Miss Marple was content, her faith in observation and truth reaffirmed. The chapter and the story ended with her quiet satisfaction, the village at peace, the truth a light in the darkness.